gets lost on the fretboard. And if you don't, you're lying. It just happens, and it takes a long time to get familiar with the whole fretboard, but I'm going to show you some things you guys can practice to greatly reduce the amount of times you get lost when you're playing. And this isn't a video where I'm just going to show you your scale positions up and down the neck. I think your scale positions are great to know. They're great to practice, especially if you're doing scale patterns and mixing up the order of notes and stuff. But what can happen is they can become very reliant on muscle memory, and you may find it doesn't really help in an improvisation setting, or you're always having to start on the low note of that position or the high note of that position in order to remember the notes in between, which is not really what we want. We want to be able to see all our available notes at one time. So in this video, I'm going to be focusing largely on chord shapes, and I love using chord shapes as visuals because when you play a chord, you're playing a bunch of notes at once, right? And in order to do that, you have to see where these notes are on the guitar. So essentially what you're doing is you're visualizing a bunch of chord tones before you play that chord, right? You have to be able to see where those chord tones are, and then you play them all together in a chord. And that is pretty much exactly what we want. We want to be able to see our chord tones up and down the neck, because those are pretty much your ideal notes to play over that chord. So if you're playing over G major, if you can just play a bunch of G major chord tones, which is G, B, and D, or the 1, 3, and 5, you know confidently those notes are going to work over G. So in order to apply this, I've broken down the process into 4 main steps. But before we get into those steps, I'm going to show you a quick example of how chords can help open up certain parts of the neck. This is something I see all the time in guitar players. So let's say we're playing in the key of A minor here. Let's say you're improvising and you're playing kind of this main A minor pentatonic position that we all know and love. And then let's say you do something like this. So you're playing down here, and then you slide up to this next position here. And you know a few choice licks in that area. I notice a lot of people, when they slide up to this area, they know kind of these top strings, these top 3 strings, top in pitch. But then let's say you come back down here, and then you don't really know where to go from there in that same position. Like a lot of people will just kind of slide back down to this comfortable zone here. But there's so much more you can do in this position. We were really only tackling half of it. We were tackling like these 3 strings, but you have these 3 low strings as well, where you can finish out the minor pentatonic scale, right? And even if you do kind of know that area, like let's say you do practice your minor pentatonic positions up and down the neck, sometimes that doesn't really help when it comes to improvising for whatever reason. So to picture a chord shape, I'm going to try to find an A minor because I'm playing over A minor. So what I'm going to do is try to see an A minor chord that uses these low strings in that position, just so I have some notes that I can focus my ideas around, and I don't have to worry about memorizing an entire scale shape here, right? So I might see this A minor chord here. Here's your flat 3, your 5th, and your root. So those are great notes to see because you probably want to be focusing your ideas around chord tones anyway. That's typically what tends to sound pretty good. So now if I'm playing up here, I know that I have these 3 notes in that triad that I can kind of see to land some ideas on. And I'm adding in some notes from the scale now, but in the back of my head, instead of just having to visualize this whole scale all the time, which eventually you do want, but to start, I'm just seeing this chord shape here, which is helping me see all those notes. So if you really want to dive in and learn how to find chord shapes up and down the neck and really open up the fretboard, check out my guitar course called Ultimate Chord Mastery. I'll leave the course link in the description. That course has everything I know about chords in one course. In there I go through major triads, minor triads, open and closed triads, drop 2 and drop 3 7th chords, tensions, embellishments, diminished chords, chord melody, a bunch of exercises and etudes and arrangements that I've done. So if you're really serious about getting better at guitar, check that out. Again, the link's in the description. And also, if you're enjoying the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment so that I can keep making videos like this for you guys. And let's get back into it. So I talked about how we can break this up into 4 steps. We're going to stick with the key of A minor. And let's say I go to the next position up. So not this one here that I just did, but the next one up. So I'm going to move up. Let's say I'm playing something around here. And I end up here, index finger on the 10th fret on the B string. There's an A. So the general area of like the 10th to the 12th fret is where we're going to be focused for these 4 steps here. So the first step is to find your roots. So I'm going to find as many A notes as I can in this position or around this position. So I know I have one here. I also know I have an open A string, right? And anything on the 12th fret is an octave up from your open strings. So I know I have one here as well. I know those are 1 octave apart. I can check with a scale, if you know a scale in this area. You can check if you know what an octave looks like, if you know some chords, whatever it is. You know you have A here, which is kind of outside of the position, and an A as well here, which is also a little bit outside of the position, but it's good to know kind of what's around there. So step 1, find your roots. I'm going to say these 2 are my roots in this position. Step 2 would be to visualize some bigger chord shapes. So specifically, I really like using caged shapes to see these positions. In this area, I know I have this A cage shape here. And what I just played is an A major chord, but I can still use that as a visual to help me locate some key notes for A minor. And the reason is, as long as I know that this is A major here, and I know that the difference between major and minor is the 3rd, or that C sharp should come down a half step to the flat 3 to make it minor. So that C sharp here and there should come down a half step to a C, and then it gives me a minor shape, which is a little bit hard to play, but as long as you can visualize that, you don't have to play it, it's really just all for the visual. You're able to see your A minor chord tones in that area. It also helps you solidify your roots, right? Those are both included in the chord. Or once you have your chord, this is the step that I think most people would skip, but it's important. If you can start to locate which one of those notes is your root, which we already did, right? Which one of those notes is your 3rd, and which one of those notes is your 5th, that's going to help you down the line with all this visualization stuff. The more you understand about which notes you're playing, the more you're going to be able to stay locked in to a position and not get lost. So if I go back to this A major shape, I know I have a root, a 3rd, major 3rd, a 5th, a root, and a major 3rd. So if I want to play A minor, I got to bring those 3rds down a half step. We talked about that. But if I didn't know where the 3rds were, how do I know which notes to bring down a half step, right? So that's pretty important. The 5th is going to stay the same. Root there. Flat 3rd. Another reason knowing these intervals is helpful is because when you eventually want to add in some notes from the scale, it's going to be a lot easier to just add in a note here and there if you know which interval you're on at any given time. So for example, if I'm in the minor 3rd, I know to get to the 4, all I got to do is move up a whole step. And now I have another note to work with. I'm throwing in a lot here. Some of it may be going over your head, which is okay. The main idea of this is just try to picture some chord shapes in that area. When you get more comfortable with that, you can start to add in more of the heavy theory stuff, bringing in scale notes, really making those connections, things like that. Step 2 is not quite done yet. I've only seen 1 chord shape, so I'm going to try to see another chord shape. Some of you may know this A minor 9 chord. There I see I have a root, flat 3, a flat 7, and a 2 or a 9. And all these numbers just come from the scale. So if you just assign a number to each major scale note, it gives you 7 notes. And the 8th note is a repeat of the 1st note. I talk about this in quite a few of my videos, so go check those out. So just to show you how this helps, this chord brings in some extra notes that aren't immediate, just A minor, straight up A minor chord tones, right? It gives me a flat 7 now, and a 2, or what we sometimes like to call a 9. So if we now bring in those 2 notes with the first chord shape that we were doing, the A minor triad essentially, there I was just combining notes from the 2 chords. And you'll notice the ideas that I'm playing sound way less scalular, which is something that a lot of people like to avoid. You don't want to always sound like you're just going up and down a scale. So this is another way to avoid that. Okay, step 3, locate your triads. Really, this is kind of an extension of step 2, but I'm making it its own step because I love triads. I think it's important to be able to see all your triads in one area. For A minor, we have all these triads right here in this position. And within those, if you can see your intervals as well, especially your roots to start, if you can see your roots, that's great. Try to see your flat 3 and your 5th as well within those triads. You'll see also if you combine those, it literally gives you an arpeggio, because what you're doing is you're playing through the chord tones in order. So I'm playing the 5th, root, flat 3, 5th, root, flat 3. And you can finish it out. The 5th, a flat 3 on the bottom. So when I'm playing that arpeggio, really in the back of my head, I'm picturing all these triads here. So now for A minor in this area, what we should have is our roots, right? Where A is, we know that's here and here. We want some bigger chord shapes, which we saw was like the C shape from the Cage system. This is a major chord, but we were using it as a visual. You can also see it as this. Hard to play. We also had this bigger A minor 9 shape. And then we have all our triads, right? And you can even see some triads if you want, or other chords that are slightly out of position, because what will happen, let's say I'm playing this A minor chord, is you'll see that actually shares this note right here and this note with this position, or this triad here, and even this triad. It's always good to see what's around it a little bit once you get used to just that position. And then within those chords, you have your arpeggio shape already, right? Step 4, this is the last step, is where you can start to add in some scale notes. And I'll also just say you can add in some chromatic notes as well if you want to. But for this video, we're just going to talk about adding in notes from the scale. So this is when you would go back and maybe refresh some of your scale positions. Or see if you can figure out the scale in this position, knowing the chord shapes and the arpeggio shapes. I'm not really going to go over that too much in depth, but one thing I will say is that sometimes it's nice to just start with chord tones and focus on bringing in like one note from the scale. So an example would be like, let's say I just bring in the second note of the scale. So in an A minor scale, that's a B. I'm going to play just chord tones, so just 1 flat 3 and 5, plus that second note of an A natural minor scale, so a B. It's going to sound like this. So all that was chord tones plus the 2. You can do this with any note from the scale. Now maybe I'll do the 4 in the scale, or the D note from an A natural minor scale. So I think that's a good way to go about it, is just to take like 1 or maybe even 2 notes from the scale, bring that in, mix it with your arpeggio notes or chord tones, and you'll start to create a stronger visual of that area. So those are the 4 steps, but really eventually we want to just make that one step. We want to get to a position and immediately see your roots, your bigger chord shapes like your Cage shapes, any other chords that you can visualize, your triads, and then notes from the scale, all mixed into one. So if I get to this position up here, 12th fret, I have a bigger shape right here, it's Cage shape, and I have some triads, arpeggio, scale, and within the scale, I want to see my chord tones, which the chords help you see. Within the chords, I want to see my arpeggios. Within the arpeggios, I want to see my chords. So next time you're practicing, pick a position that's not as comfortable for you and do this process. Try to find as many chords as you can in that area. A lot of this process is internal, so making sure you can really visualize where your roots are, and from there, maybe where your thirds are and your fifths are as well. From then on, you can start to add in notes from the scale. And then what you could do is put on a backing track or a loop and just try to jam in that one position, improvise in that one position, and see if you can come up with some new ideas. And again, if you really want to dive into this stuff and master your chords, check out my guitar course below. I hope you guys learned something. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.